August is a catcher.
Salisbury, you
That kid's a catcher.
Up a different color.
In him out.
Oh, your son's a catcher. I didn't know who was who once they got their helmets on and everything.
Oh, we are. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Joan, roll call.
Director Hopper. Here. Director Kelsenberg.
Here?
Director Lauer.
Here?
Director Petrie. Here. Director Corbani. Here. Director Seeladder.
Here.
Chair Sherman.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. I will go ahead and make a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Can I get a second, please?
So moved?
Right. Director Thielander with the second. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We have a consent agenda tonight that is up on the screen. Payment of invoices from April 20th, 24 till May 10th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda? Director Lauer with the motion to approve. And second. Great. Director Petrie with the second. All those in favor of approving tonight's consent agenda, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion passes. All right, tonight it's a learning session, kind of a little study session here on a couple different topics. But first and foremost, glad to be back at the Oak Park Learning Center here. I think we all have a greater appreciation for it after just like moving around and playing musical chairs between our buildings. Although it was wonderful to see all of our buildings, it feels good and a nice setup to be able to see everyone a little bit better. So. We're glad to be back, and hopefully the audio will be better for everyone watching at home too. And so thanks to the community for their patience over the last year, because I know the audio was a challenge at times. Tonight, our first study session topic is the high school student schedule. Just for a little bit of background information while our presenters come up. Is we, almost exactly a year ago, the board took a look at an introductory presentation on the high school schedule. And so the board's direction to staff was to form a working group and to start looking at schedule options, what they liked, what they didn't like, and make some sort of recommendation to the board. I mean, there's no timeline attached to this. We're simply studying the topic and looking at our options, and much more work to be done in the process. So we hope that the community engages throughout the whole process. And welcome to the entire work group here. And I understand Sam was also on some of the tours, or some of the student council reps were. So we can get the students' perspective tonight too. So thank you.
And before they start, I just want to make it clear to the school board and to the public. The high school administration and leadership team was really charged over a year ago to look at different options to meet the needs of our students. And one of the real challenges that we currently have under the 6-period day is we're really limited in the number of college or high school credits, as we're preparing kids for college and other things, in the number of credits we can earn during the day. And so as the state comes in and continues to add mandates for courses and suggestions on different things that our students should be offered, really the charge has been and the charge that I gave Rob was, okay, 6-period day is done well, but what are some options we can take a look at with your team to really look at how we can meet the needs of our kids by providing more opportunities. And that really aligns with some of our strategic directions of taking a look at the learning process to make sure it's adaptable to meeting the student needs. So you're going to hear a lot tonight about what they've done and how they've come together with their process. At the end of it, they're going to have some ideas that they're going to be looking at. One of the things that we have to do as an administration at the district level is, okay, if this is a priority for the high school, if it's a priority for the board and the community, we have to figure out how we're going to make it happen and support it. So, but before any of that happens, I think the first step tonight is to really take a listen to what the high school team has come up with and just kind of go from there. So Rob, I'll turn over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Funk, and thank you, Director Sherman, and all of the members of the board. We are honored to be here tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to explore something this big, and that we've been given the opportunity to dig into that a little bit. And I just want to say, I think I speak for everyone when I say I am just really, really proud of the work that our leadership team has done to get to this point. And hopefully we leave you with that same sense of pride when we're done presenting this evening. Without further ado, I'm going to allow some of the members of my leadership team to introduce themselves. We're each going to take turns at various points in the presentation to explain a couple of the steps along the way. Again, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rob Bach, and I am the principal at the high school.
I am Doug Long, currently teach at the high school as well as act as an instructional coach.
And my name is Sydney Pyrus. I'm one of the school counselors at the high school.
I'm Alex Shern. I'm another school counselor at the high school.
Good evening, Matt Kraft, assistant principal.
Rachel Style, I teach English, and I'm one of our Career Pathways coordinators.
Amanda Bannock, a math teacher and PLC building lead at the high school.
Okay, and with that, as we get set to present, I'll just kind of preface our presentation by saying, anytime we talk about change, the change process is not easy. And especially when you are talking about something that is impactful, or as impactful as a schedule change to as many people as are involved in our organization, that's a big deal. And there's probably not going to be a perfect outcome. In fact, there's no way you're going to wind up getting a perfect outcome out of that. But with that said, I believe strongly that our process has been solid throughout the way. And I think that the people who are up here presenting with me tonight will be glad to speak to that process. And again, just reiterate the idea that we're really, really proud of where we are. Just to give you a little bit of background, we did discuss this a little bit last year. To the best of our knowledge, as our historian was able to go back and ascertain, we, as you know, are currently on a 6-period day. We run a semester system, so we refer to that as a 6x2, 6 classes times 2 grading periods. We've been on that schedule since about 2005-06. One little hiccup during that period occurred in 20 and 21. With the pandemic, as we tried to be responsive to the student needs that we knew we were going to encounter at that time. And at that time, for that 1 year, we actually did run a modified block. So we kind of dipped our toe in the pool a little bit and experimented with a block system. The purpose of that and the reason behind that really was to give our kids fewer things to focus on at one time. We knew that everyone was juggling something completely new with regard to online learning and things like that. And so we were just trying to help our kids out with some of the mental health things that we anticipated we were going to see. But other than that, we've been on a 6-period day for almost 20 years. Prior to that, there was about a 4 or 5 year period where the high school ran on a 5-period trimester day. And then prior to that, there was a brief period of time where the high school actually ran on a 7-period day. And so in conclusion, you can see that over time, the schedule is something that evolves. A high school schedule is something that evolves, and that's not uncommon for a lot of districts. And while I can't speak to all of the history here in Stillwater, I will say that it's hard to imagine a time when there has been a greater purpose or a greater reason behind why we might explore a schedule change than where we're at right now. Bottom line is, our leadership team believes strongly that our current 6x2 schedule does not meet student needs. We think that it can be better. To use Dr. Funk's language, throughout our district, we can and should expect more. And that's where we are right now. In terms of some of the ways that our current schedule falls short, there are a number of transitions during the day. Every time that there's a new class period, that's a transition point. We tend to lose time. That tends to be where our inefficiencies tend to become exacerbated in a school day, and so the more transitions there are, that also tends to be the point in time when you might have discipline issues and other things that wind up getting in the way of learning. 6 classes at one time is about the most that any schools run. Yes, there are some that have a 7-period day where students are required to manage and juggle 7 classes at one time. But outside of that, 6 classes is about the most that any school is currently asking their students to manage. We've talked a number of times before, including with this group, about the limited number of elective opportunities. In particular, we've talked about, just as kind of the Exhibit A, being the music student who wants to go to a 4-year school and therefore it also takes world language. If you take music and you take world language and you do that over the course of 4 years, that's all of your elective opportunities that are used up, and immediately those students are thrust into a position where their Phi-Ed credit and their health credit, which are required to graduate, have to be taken online. And when you take them online, while that sounds like a nice creative solution, the bottom line is it's still adding another class to their schedule. They are then forced, if they want to take all of those electives, they are forced to take another class in their schedule. And in addition to that, we've talked about the idea that there's also an increased number of required credits. Dr. Funk mentioned other additional requirements that are coming around the pike. We have personal finance that is coming online. That's going to be a required credit for students. So again, to use the music student as an example, they simply don't have room in their schedule right now to do that. They're already juggling 2 additional online credits just to make their current requirements work. In addition to that, the state's also had conversation around other classes, things like ethnic studies right now is kind of highly recommended by the state, and there's conversation around additional requirements that may come around the bend. We have been on the 6-period day schedule for quite some time, as you know. I mentioned that earlier. And so I'm sure that there are probably a number of people who are asking, what's the big deal? You know, we've been on 6 periods for an awfully long time. Why would we need to potentially change that now? One of the answers for that is because over the last 3 to 4 years, some of the issues that we were seeing prior to that have become exacerbated since the COVID pandemic. We are seeing an increasing number of mental health concerns with our students at a rate that is currently unprecedented. And as we continue to try to triage that, that becomes important because students can't learn if they're dysregulated. We have to get them into a space where they have the capacity to take on the learning and the instruction of our excellent teachers. In addition to that, school apathy has set in to a higher degree, and our teachers are qualitatively reporting a loss of engagement with students in the classroom. In addition to that, you're going to hear a report after our report on absenteeism and the rates specific to Stillwater, but it's not just a Stillwater issue. This is a nationwide issue where, especially since COVID, school has become, I'm going to use air quotes, but optional in the eyes and minds of a number of our students and their families. To some degree, some of the problem solving that we had to do around COVID has made it easier for students to not be in person. When we figured out how to put things out online and supply students with that content, it became really, really easy. And after students got used to the idea of spending 4 months at home, it became really, really easy to get into the habit of just saying, you know what, I can pick up on this stuff without having to be in person. The discussions that we have in class, the learning, the level of engagement has all suffered as a direct result of that. And because of that, we feel that we need to do something to recapture the feeling of school. And what that is, I'll give you a quick little history lesson here. I won't ask for a show of hands for how many of you are actually old enough to know when that, or actually were alive when this magazine cover came out. Dr. Funk raised his hand, Ms. Mitri, yeah. And I join you, by the way, so you're among friends, it's okay. But this magazine cover, this was the cover of Time magazine. Minnesota Governor Wendell Anderson graced the cover of Time magazine in what's a semi-famous cover for those of us in Minnesota now. This was back in the early 70s, probably about 1973, 74, something like that. And this came out kind of as a result of something that at the time was referred to as the Minnesota Miracle. This predates the Vikings. It's not the playoff miracle that we pulled off, but what it was in reference to a legislative session where lawmakers came together and decided to completely overhaul the funding of the public education system in the state of Minnesota. They completely restructured the tax system. The state took on much more of the operating costs associated with school districts, and basically they completely retooled how the state was going to deliver education. And what we found over time is that, lo and behold, it worked. We got a lot of credit for what was happening educationally in Minnesota. Not only was the Minnesota education system recognized as one of the tops in the country and in the nation, but there were residual effects too and impacts across our state along the lines of lower poverty, lower crime rates, and Minnesota was recognized as having a very, very high quality of life, and we became just a highly respected state in the nation in terms of the quality of life that we were able to offer our residents. What we are proposing to you today is bold, it's new, it's different, but we believe that it's needed. And what we believe we're proposing is a reboot of what a high school student's experience would look like at Stillwater Area High School. Some of the things that we know that we're tasked with, we struggle with finding time during the course of the day to implement right now. And we believe that the research that we have done and the processes that we have gone through to get us to this point put us in a position where we can deliver better for our students in a way that hopefully will translate to the good life at Stillwater Area High School.
So to piggyback off of what Mr. Bach just mentioned is our charge in talking about the process that we've done. One of the things he mentioned earlier on is just how proud we are of the process that we've engaged with, starting all the way from last school year. And so to speak specifically to a couple of these items, for example, the students, when we first started thinking about changing our schedule and looking at the different types of kind of considerations that would be on their minds, we put together some presentations that got sent out during 5th period. We sent out surveys to students to get their feedback and really talking and learning from them about what are those choices that they're having to make, why are they having to make those choices, and then thinking about from within our system what types of things are in our control to help address that and try to alleviate some of those considerations, right? So again, going back to students having to take sometimes 7 classes, including an online class when they're already having to juggle a music activity, maybe a sport, a work kind of situation as well. And so it was a lot of strain that we were putting on our students, right? By them not being able to essentially make some of those choices within their school day to accommodate all that. From a staff lens, in terms of, yes, lots of surveys were out. We conducted site visits, and I know that we'll be talking about that in a moment. But some of our leadership team went on site visits to other schools in the area that had some of the schedules that we looked at. We looked at a variety of schedules, not just obviously our 6x2, but a variety of them. And so we had staff that engaged in those surveys that went to site visits at different high schools to learn from those schools on what was working, what wasn't working, why was it working or why wasn't it, especially schools that had actually switched their schedules within the last little bit. And had lots of time devoted during our staff meetings, for example, to not just process some of that, but then for some of you that might be aware of kind of a SWOT analysis, right? So what are some of the strengths there? What are some of the weaknesses? What are some of the opportunities, as well as some of the threats, right, that we just need to be accounting for? And so from a staff lens, there was a lot of, again, being really proud about the work that we're doing, the research that was conducted, being very purposeful with that, and trying to really process it. And again, going back to Mr. Bach's perspective of we're not going to make everyone happy, right? But we're going to try to do our best to make it make sense for as many people as possible. And then, of course, that last piece of engaging our families and looking for their feedback and some of the things that they're hearing from their students. What's working well for them? What types of things are they liking? But then also, what are some of the struggles that they're having? One of the things I think was really helpful about that feedback is that in all instances of that feedback, we had pretty high rates of completion of those surveys and participation of those surveys. And that's, as any of you that have had to send out surveys before, trying to get people to follow through with it is no easy feat. From there, just by starting again, getting that feedback and trying to make sense of it, it became kind of this qualitative analysis, right, of looking for some themes and working with our staff to develop some possible recommendations of what we could move forward with. And that's where we are right now, is presenting that recommendation to you in terms of the work that we've done, the why, and then of course leading into what we're proposing.
All right, so from that feedback from both students, staff, and families, we developed goals of a schedule change. As both Dr. Funk and Mr. Bach had mentioned, the importance for increased elective opportunities. As we have more required more required classes in our schedule, we felt the need, and the staff and the students and families also felt the need that we needed to increase the opportunities for electives. And that may be more elective classes, as well as a diverse offering of classes within the core subject areas as well. So not just math, science, English, and social studies opportunities as well. And then also provide flexibility and time for both students and staff. So that's finding a schedule that allows for that time to be built into the schedule, to have a little bit more flexibility to incorporate things that can help our students out throughout the day, whether it's in learning or mental health, social emotional learning, things like that. And then that last bullet point there, addressing students' mental health needs. Everyone mentioned this as a really high priority for them. We've already had a great start on that this year, addressing student mental health needs with the mental health first aid training, and continuing to go forward on that. The staff kind of came together and tried to find a couple of key points that would help address those things. One of those being fewer periods in the day. That equals fewer transitions or less transitions, less opportunities for absenteeism throughout the day, wandering throughout the hallways, less opportunities for behavioral issues as well. Fewer courses at one time, so that allows students to maybe focus more in on a couple particular classes rather than having to juggle and balance 6, 7 classes in there at any given time. And then more time to dig deeper into content, so depth over breadth. That allows the student to engage more in the material and to be more engaged in the classroom. Also allows more time for the teachers as well to have a variety of techniques in their teaching to engage those students more as well.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we moved from setting those goals, which we actually did last spring in April, to where we are now making a recommendation to the board. So using the universal design process, our team started with research. Some of the first research we did was visiting 2 metro high schools, Edina High School and Wayzata High School. Edina has something called a modified 7x2, so they have 7 periods a day over a 2-day span, so all block. But then 3 of those days are full 7 periods, so it's a really unique hybrid schedule. We also visited Wayzata High School, which is more of a traditional 4x4 block. And there were 3 key takeaways I think our leadership team gleaned from those visits. The first one being the students really appreciated the time to really dig deep, that the depth of the content made up for loss of instructional minutes. We heard a lot from staff concern about gaps in learning, instructional minutes, and both staff and students universally said it was not an issue. In fact, we got to go deeper because we weren't starting, stopping. We got to go for a full 80, 90-minute block, complete the lab versus setting it up, taking it down. So that was one key takeaway. The other thing students really stressed was we get to work on our homework in school with the teacher right alongside us, instead of packing up, taking work home, and trying to figure it out on our own. And finally, the having fewer classes at a time, which Alec just pointed out was one of our key goals. Having 4 periods of homework a day versus 6 or more was really pivotal for kids, and they said that really helped with their learning. They could really concentrate. So that was one of our pieces, and from that, our staff pulled back together and created a rubric that was based on staff feedback. So at multiple staff meetings, we asked staff, what are things that are important to you, important to your program? And from there, that rubric then carried the work forward. We did some prototyping, we did additional research. So some of the educational research was fascinating. I think we made some assumptions that we would do some research and might point us in one direction. The research was largely inconclusive. There was no one schedule that came out and said, that's the one that's going to make our kids show up and work harder and eliminate all of these other residual problems. We found some pieces that rose to the top, like fewer transitions meant fewer behaviors and passing times, but largely speaking, there was no one schedule that said, that's the one. So from there, we regrouped and we went back to what are our goals and which schedule is going to lead us in that direction. So Sydney mentioned we did student, staff, and family surveys, and we learned from our students and our staff that, and our families that the current schedule isn't meeting all of our needs. And Mr. Bach referenced some of what those needs are. From there, we did a lot of prototyping, ideation. We invited staff to come together on 6 different occasions and, say, if you could build the dream schedule, what would that look like? Let's get some feedback. And we did that 6 times. Moving to what the recommendation is that you're going to hear tonight, that really is kind of the comprehensive information of all of those different data points to inform the recommendation here. So you're going to see students reflected in the decision, families reflected in the decision, staff, and also other schools informing what you're going to hear tonight.
Good evening. Thank you, Rachel. I got a ear-to-ear smile because this is super exciting to me. As someone who works with a group of great staff at Stillwater High School to create the master schedule from year to year, when I see this possibility, it is absolutely exciting. So take a look here. Here is an example 9th grade schedule, student schedule on the 4x4 block schedule. And what I want you to notice, first of all, are the exciting possibilities of what is new. And so you see on there the possibility of a course like a 9th grade seminar, where we could bring our 9th grade class in and provide them some structured time to really understand what it takes to be a successful high school student. And part of their personalized learning plan from 9th grade through 12th grade, get them on a pathway, a positive pathway moving forward. Currently in our schedule, we don't have the opportunity for that structured time. Let's look at what else we see on there that pops out. Opportunities for more electives. So quite often, if you are a high school student who is taking one of our fantastic music programs and courses and a world language course, there's your schedule in 9th grade. And so, as was mentioned earlier, if you want to get in that required health or that required physical education, you have to do that online. Notice here this student getting their physical education in during the school day and also having other opportunities for electives that they wouldn't have in the 6x2. What else do we notice? Creating an opportunity for courses and programs that thrive at Stillwater Area High School. And one of the reasons why they thrive is because they have a year-long touch point with their students. So when you determine the outcome of a block schedule, you can see that some courses will end at the end of first semester, or maybe they'll start at semester 2 and end at the end of the school year, right? And yet we know we have courses and programs at Stillwater High School that absolutely thrive. And the reason why they do so is because they have year-long touch points with their students. So when you look at period 4 there, that would be an opportunity for a student in choir to be able to connect either, for example, every other day, all year long with their choir teacher, or maybe on the same day in a, a split period. You see the periods are much longer, as was mentioned earlier, and maybe they could even touch base with English and choir on the same day. That is our sample 9th grade schedule. We have another one that is a sample 12th grade schedule. And again, what's the first thing we notice? What's new? Again, on that pathway to personalized learning, having an opportunity to have a senior capstone and have that in a student's schedule where they can really encapsulate their 4 years of high school in some type of project, community project, pathway project. Again, we don't have room for that in the current 6x2. What else do we notice? Again, opportunities for courses that have a year-long touch point. AP or advanced placement. We want to start with those students at the beginning of the school year, and yet that big high-stakes test isn't until May, right? So looking at our programs and our courses where we might need to be creative and create some year-long touch points within the schedule. And then taking a look at, again, more elective opportunity, and then taking a look at, for example, their choir. Our music programs that currently thrive. They're superior music programs. And providing an opportunity for students that want to immerse themselves into these programs as part of their personalized learning plan, giving them the opportunity to do that as a year-long course, but still provide additional elective opportunities. So again, I've got an ear-to-ear smile because I am super excited about this schedule.
And if I can just interject a little bit too, Joan, if you can go back to that last slide, just a couple of other talking points on the 4x4. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this represents a lot of conversation and a lot of research, but also, like I said, a lot of talking with people in and around school about what's going to work for our programs. As Mr. Kraft said, we know that there are some specialty programs at school that benefit from meeting with their kids every single day. The 4x4 block, a traditional block, if you stay really, really rigid in a block schedule, doesn't allow for that. We've kind of stated from the get-go that we are going to think creatively about this. The 4x4 represents a framework for us. But we are tasked, and I have tasked our team and our staff with thinking creatively to come up with win-win solutions for how do we problem solve through these things to make sure that the needs of our specialty programs are met. I know you've heard specifically about music, but music's not alone. I want to emphasize there's a number of specialty programs. You think about journalism. They do productions the whole entire year long. We can't afford to just condense all of that into first semester and then say we're not going to do journalism second semester. Same thing with yearbook. We can't have kids finishing a yearbook in January and then have nothing going on in the second half of the year. AVID, BAR, those are year-long things which we have to think creatively about, but we have actively engaged in conversations with the people from those departments to say what are the needs from within your department and how do we make those needs work. Just as an example, again, I'm going to highlight this as an example. I don't want to overstate this too much because there's a number of programs. But again, if you look back on the slide for 9th grade, one of the proposals that we came up with regard to the music was the idea that, again, we want to be careful because if music's important to a student, with only 4 periods, if you make it year-long, suddenly that could suck up 25% of a student's schedule, right? And that's problematic because then that defeats the purpose of all of the electives that we talked about. So in talking with the music department and in coming up with solutions for how does this work, you can see one of the creative solutions that we outlined is that potentially in grades 9 and 10 and in some of those introductory level choirs, we might run choir on kind of a split period. That you might have heard us refer to that as skinnies. Mr. Kraft talked about it as a year-long touch point. The idea being in that period 4 class, we know that every student that takes choir in 9th grade is also going to take English. So we take some of those English sections and say, you are actually going to teach, instead of teaching 85 minutes in one semester over 2 quarters, you're going to teach 45 minutes, close to what we currently have, and you're going to do that all year long, and your kids then are going to go back and forth with choir so that they get choir every day. That way, again, we can continue to have concerts in the spring, and our kids can continue to receive that instruction through the course of the spring. If you go, Joan, again to the grade 12, by the time a student matriculates to some of the upper levels of choir, and this could hold true for orchestra or band or, again, our journalism, our yearbook, any of those specialty pieces, by the time students reach upper level, if they're going to be in the top choir, there we would give them a full block. And if you run the math on what it looks like for the number of credits or the percentage of credits that a student would have under a format like that, it's very, very comparable to what we currently have on the 6-period day. And again, I'm gonna credit a number of people from within our music department for doing research on their own and for advocating for what kind of a schedule will work. But I highlight that as an example of the ways that our staff has been engaged with thinking around problem solving and trying to be creative and saying the 4x4 represents a framework. We will work to try to get creative as possible within that framework to find ways to meet that.
Can I just ask, this is probably the part that I have the most questions on, just because I'm not familiar with how the day would run. So I don't want to interrupt, but do you want questions now or at the end on this part? Because this is a little confusing for some people.
Whatever makes sense for you. This is a learning session, so
Right.
I want it to be impactful for you. So if it's helpful to do questions now, I don't want to derail that.
Okay. I just had a couple, just on this piece. I just want to make sure that before we end the presentation, that we have a really good understanding of what this might look like. So you said skinnies, right? And I'm assuming that's under period, oh, wait, go back to the 9th of period 4, I think, on the 9th grade? Those are the skinnies where they're?
Correct.
So could a teacher be teaching both a skinny 9th grade English and a full block English? The same teacher, okay.
Potentially.
Okay.
And again, we don't totally know what we don't know because we haven't run the schedule yet.
Okay.
However, because part of what we have to talk through is there's probably a number of programs that would be interested in running this every single day. And we are going to have to put some constraints around that and parameters around it and say not every course is able to do this, where that presents too many constraints to run the schedule. But I think what it's fair to say is that we would try, currently, and Mr. Kraft does an amazing job in working with our departments at creating teacher schedules that minimize the number of teaching preps during the course of a day. So we don't want teachers to have to teach multiple preps during the day if that's avoidable. So if there are multiple sections of English 9 and ways to kind of consolidate that with a couple of teachers in a way that makes sense for the schedule, that's always something that we would look to try to do.
So you would try to kind of limit the skinny to just like a one period. It wouldn't be a day full of skinny. That's kind of what I was.
Correct. And again, it has to work for a schedule too, right? It has to work for the student schedule. So whatever class you skinny with, so again, in this particular example, the reason that we would look at that is to accommodate choir students, or that could be band, that could be orchestra, that could be journalism, any of those kinds of things. But the bottom line is there needs to be another course that students are scheduled into that works for their schedule that they've actually selected to be able to do that. And that's part of why, again, you can't do this overlaid all over the place, but you look and get creative with the programs that you know would benefit from that.
Okay, because that was my question. I just didn't know what a skinny was. Sam?
On the grade 12, it had the AP classes as skinnies. Would it be all AP classes ran as skinnies?
That's a great question, and I would just say emphatically no, it would not be all AP, but we use that as an example because of the piece that Mr. Kraft had talked about. We know that AP students obviously would benefit from having this year long. They're taking a high stakes exam towards the end of the year. We want their instruction to be as close to that as humanly possible. So that would be another example of something that we might consider. But again, you have to find something where there's a number of students that are transitioning back and forth between both of those classes to make that work. And we're not going to be able to do that for every single class. But it would be an example of something that could potentially be looked at.
Dr. Petrie?
I had a question about the skinnies as well. How does that dovetail with state standards? I mean, if you have a full section, or if you just have a skinny, are you giving enough instruction? I mean, what are the standards there? What are the requirements in terms of state standards?
It's a math problem, right? So again, if you look at, in this particular example, the skinny, or the year-long touch point, is listed in period 1. So with two classes here, the two classes that we've kind of gone back to back on in this example are AP Gov and AP Stats. Those are traditionally year-long classes. So on a regular block schedule, that would fill up quarter 1 and quarter 2. So AP Gov would be quarter 1, AP Gov would be quarter 2, AP Stats would be quarter 3, quarter 4. What we're doing here is we're saying, you're not going to teach it on the full block, so instead of having a class for 80 minutes for 2 quarters, you're going to get the class for 40 to 45 minutes, but you're going to get it all year long. So math-wise, the number of instructional minutes is the same. that make sense? So it's half as long during the day, but it's twice as long throughout the course of the year to make sure that the total number of minutes adds up. But what that does is it allows both of those classes to continue concurrently until close to a time when the test would come.
I think I was curious about the English, and only having, just the skinny for English for a whole year. But
it translates to exactly the same as 2 quarters on the block.
Okay.
And those skinnies transitioning, that's not a concern for you, knowing that your goal was to minimize transition time?
Again, you have to consider the number of students that are going to be on that schedule. Those are students who are impacted by those courses that they've selected. So that's going to be a smaller percentage of our students. The vast majority of our students are going to be on a more traditional.
Yes, Dr. Acker.
Thank you. Okay, so I was very confused by what was given to us as our samples to work from, and it again goes back to the skinnies. It seems like we are trying to do a whole lot of creative solutions, both year-long and a semester-long and quarter-long classes, kind of all in the same thing. So my question is actually more for the counselors. And how do we make that happen? And did we ask Wayzata, did they give us any tips? Like how, this just seems like it's super complex. And the more Mr. Bach talks, the more complex it seems. So who gets to figure out that math problem and challenges? Or, I don't know, who's in charge of schedule stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Rob indicated, it'll be a new challenge. Absolutely. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to ensure that we're identifying our priorities of what are our courses and programming that need to have year-long touch points. And that's really where the conversation starts, right? And so that's going to be, that is conversation that is currently happening. As you'll learn in a little bit, our staff are dividing themselves into 3 essential strategic groups to plan forward, and one of them, the academic group, is talking about these key important decisions that we'll be making about these year-long touch points. I will say this, the more, I'll say it in reverse, the less touch points, year-long touch points that you have, the better the schedule will be. So that then is upon us to ensure that we're going through a process that really clearly defines our priorities. And we want to ensure that if that's a priority enough to have a year-long touch point, AKA a potential skinny, okay, that it is that important then to ensure that it happens in the schedule. Did that answer your question?
Mostly, yes.
As someone that's worked in a school that has a similar block schedule that's been modified from a counseling lens, because like Mr. Kraft was talking about, he does a lot of the work in terms of building the master schedule to begin with and playing around with the computer program, and what he's alluding to is the more any type of restrictions that you put on the software, you're going to cause more constraints, right? But from the perspective of counselors, of once that schedule's run, it's our job then to go through it and make sure that, there's no holes in student schedules, that it didn't accidentally put them in all of their electives and not their core classes, right? All those types of fun things. Working on a schedule like this, it has been much easier from that lens, because instead of 6 classes within 2 semesters that you're trying to squish all in there, this now creates more opportunities, right? So if I'm trying to get a kid into geometry, right, for the whole year, that's what I'm having to deal with, right, is that class for the whole year. But something like this that gives me the opportunity to only focus on a semester versus the whole year, it gives more, once the schedule run, it gives us more flexibility to make those adjustments and make sure the math is working out and they are in all of the, bare minimum required courses, plus hopefully, their top choices for their electives, including, the art classes, the music, any type of world language, health, PE, that kind of deal. So from a counseling perspective, this actually frees up space when we're actually plugging some things in.
And I would just reiterate too, there's a limited number of programs that we would probably consider this for. So I don't want people to think that I know there's a lot of focus right now on the skinnies because that's where maybe the confusion lies. But again, I want to emphasize the idea that there's a relatively limited number of things. Music, it happens to be a good example, right? Because we've had so much conversation with them, and we don't want to lose the special, unique nature of what they've been able to accomplish and what they offer our kids. So we recognize that. All right, that's an opportunity for some creative problem solving. How can we do that? And again, I think that we have ways to do that. So that's listed up there as an example for how to solve some of those problems. That's the exception rather than the rule, if that makes sense. And as Sydney said, I think there's more buckets for students to fall into because there's 16 places for students to find their course rather than 12, or there's 8 courses rather than 6, 8 opportunities rather than 6. That makes scheduling easier.
Okay. Going back to, I think Sam mentioned some AP concerns. Have you looked at like the research out there? I mean, because I'm assuming that there might be some AP courses that will have to be taught in a block well before the exam. Like, how is that handled? Because I'm assuming from a scheduling standpoint, not every AP class can be taught in conjunction with when the exam takes place. Did you do any research into specifically like the AP classes? Have there been any impact on schools with scores, AP test scores, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can speak to what we learned when we were out in Wayzata, and they said they had no data to support any decline in their scores. They still have and maintain high test scores. And I would say also we're having conversations within our building about transitioning some of our AP courses to concurrent enrollment in at least 2 of our larger core departments. And so where some areas that might still be an issue 2 to 3 years from now, I would say based on the discussions we're having around concurrent enrollment, that might be less of an issue school-wide as we currently see in our courses right now.
And when you say concurrent enrollment, that's
partnering with universities so kids take college courses in the high school instead of leaving the building for PSEO. So instead of the AP where you sit in a course and you take a test at the end of the year, concurrent is if you're in the course and you get the grade the university requires, you're automatically getting that transcripted credit.
That was, I think, what we used to call like the college in the schools, right?
Yes.
Because I think we've heard about that at the board
Yes.
table.
Yep. So CIS is the University of Minnesota's branded name for it.
Okay, got it.
It's more broadly known as concurrent enrollment, but it's the exact same thing,
Okay,
just at
so
other
looking
universities.
we're growing those opportunities. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And just for some context with Wayzata 2, most of their AP classes were run on a 3-quarter.
2 of them were.
Oh, just 2 of them? And then most of them were.
Only 2.
Okay. So either on the block on a semester or 3 quarters. So there are a couple different opportunities for that as well. And as Mr. Bach said, that these are just examples.
Yes, Dr. Corbett.
Thank you. So, is this a real schedule?
This is a sample schedule.
So the reason I asked is because, does that mean kids will have more opportunities in terms of, because it's a sample, my mind is kind of, I'm trying to, because I know Spanish is not an elective, right? Is Spanish an elective class?
It is an elective, yeah.
Was it not required prior?
It's not been required.
Really? Okay, great.
It's a common misunderstanding.
Yeah.
It's a common misunderstanding. World language is not a requirement for graduation. However, there are lots of colleges out there that do require, for admission purposes to their university, at least 2 years of the same world language while in high school. So it is a common misconception that's out there, but it is still obviously a smart decision for many students that are looking to go that route, because if they don't take it, then they've closed some doors for themselves later on.
All right. Thank you for that, because I thought it was required. What was the schedule like? Because here we have 4 elective spaces. How many electives did we have prior to the sample that we have right now?
Yeah, on our current schedule, again, a 6x2, you have 12 credit-bearing opportunities each year, times 4 years means that a student has 48 opportunities over the course of their high school career. 43 are required for graduation. And of those 43, gosh, you're putting me on the spot now. I had this in an earlier presentation. I want to say minus 11. So 11 of them are required to be elective. So what's 43 minus 11 would be 32. 32 required credits that we require for graduation. So between their math, their English, their social studies, they're required to take 32. They have choice for 11 or more. On the current schedule, on a 4x4, again, 4 times 4 means you have 16 opportunities each year. 16 times 4 years means there are 64 credit-bearing opportunities. One of the things, and again, we'll talk about this in a little bit, is obviously we would have to adjust what the graduation requirements are there. But what that does is it actually allows a little bit of an opportunity to potentially do both. When we talk about expecting more and changing the experience for our students, we can increase the amount that is actually required of students right now, but also give them more opportunities within that. The number of elective opportunities goes up from 2 opportunities each grading period to 4 opportunities.
That's exactly it. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience in that. Did you guys have some schedule specific?
Yeah, I just had one, and I recognize the sample, and this probably speaks more to my own math phobia. But looking at this student would have first and second quarter geometry, and then not have math again until next year. Is that problematic for?
That's a
learning?
great question and a great observation. 2 things, and anyone else can piggyback on this too. Yes, it's possible. One of the things that we learned from Wayzata was math and world language tend to be the 2 disciplines that we tend to think of as being very foundational. And so when we have concerns about gaps existing, those tend to be the 2 courses that we focus on. Qualitative research from Wayzata indicated that the concerns that we have about loss over gap did not translate. They did not materialize. So a student that takes Spanish, say we flip-flop the geometry in the Spanish 1. Say they had Spanish first quarter, second quarter, and then don't get Spanish again until the following year. The world language teachers were very concerned about loss and retention and things like that. And again, what they found is that just didn't translate. Kids were able to come back in. They started up their next year on world language, and away they went. With math, in addition to that, the other piece that I would say that I anticipate happening, I experienced this, I lived this in a school that I taught in that transitioned to a block. This was also corroborated at Wayzata. In math, what a number of students will do, because they have so many more opportunities, they will actually double up on math. And so they will take Algebra 2, quarter 1, quarter 2, and they'll take Algebra 3, quarter 3, quarter 4, and they actually get 2 years of math in. And so for students that are going to 4-year colleges and universities, that is not an uncommon practice at all. And in fact, I'll just share with you an off-the-cuff conversation I had with the Wayzata principal. He asked me casually, he said, "What's the highest level of math class that you have?" And I said, "Well, we offer Calc BC, but the reality is we actually haven't been able to run it for the past 2 years because we haven't had enough students sign up for it." He said, "You will exhaust your math curriculum. Within 2 years, you'll be getting your teachers to become licensed in either linear algebra or multivariable calculus or whatever the next steps are, because you will have kids that are exhausting your math curriculum because they will accelerate themselves through."
You could do the same thing with foreign language then, couldn't you?
You absolutely could.
If you wanted to do the 2 years to make sure you can have those doors open from a counselor standpoint. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Kellenberg.
So in the preseason discussion on this, the question was tossed to me about the attention span. So you're gonna have a longer period of time, 83 minutes. So I'm just gonna be the cutoff man and throw it to you and let you address attention spans.
I'm happy to speak to that. That was one thing our staff had a lot of questions about, and we're hearing, kids our TikTok generation, we can't even keep them focused for 53 minutes. How are we going to do it on 83 minutes? And the staff at both schools said they would never go back. They would never go back to those shorter periods if they could, because they've learned how to chunk their curriculum, have brain breaks, have transitions within the period, embedded work time. So it's not like a teacher is standing up there for 83 minutes and expecting the kids just to stare at them. That's not how they run their curriculum. And so you'll hear later on in the presentation how PD will be part of our plan to help support our staff make that transition to longer class periods with more chunked learning and instruction to help better support that with our kids.
I think too, I heard from the math teachers that I talked to at Wayzata that they actually found it was maybe not easier, but students understood more that it was important to be engaged during that time. They were able to get up and move around more. They had a little more freedom with what they did with their time while they were in class on certain days. So I think it actually could potentially be more engaging for the students in longer class periods.
Well, and in math, you said there's time maybe to do the homework in with
Yeah.
support, which
Yeah.
would be, I think, significant.
Yeah,
a
like
significant
right now, if we
advantage.
get through a lesson early, it's still maybe students have like 15 minutes to work on something. Most days it's maybe only 5 to 10. So, I mean, this would really give us more opportunity and give students more opportunity too.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for letting us disrupt to have this a little bit, the schedules explained, because the skinnies, I was unfamiliar with them, so you can continue.
Well, this next slide is really just kind of summarizing. I think a lot of what you asked about is summarized here. We see a lot of room for opportunities here. Again, we talked about graduation requirements. We can actually require more opportunities for our students in this block-based schedule while still providing them with more elective opportunity. You know, we saw with the math that over the course they have 64 opportunities to get credits, and that's a lot more than what they have now. So fewer courses at one time is a big one. I think we heard from students a lot that it would be nice to only have to think about 4 courses per semester, you know, if they could. Time to dig deeper into the content. That's a scary thought for some teachers. But I think if we have the professional development, that's definitely an additional consideration we need to take into account. We can help provide and plan professional development for our teachers that's meaningful and gives them time to work on becoming more comfortable with those things. And I think with anything, like the process of expecting more and doing and changing something like this, it comes with probably a little bit of a mess, but change isn't worth it unless you're able to learn from it and have a little bit of a growth mindset with it. So, yeah.
So, as you can see, we've had a pretty rigorous year in terms of planning what to do next. And we have some work ahead of us, as you can imagine, to get ready for this for 2025, 2026. As we start to think about this with the new opportunities for credit options, we're going to need some time to start developing some courses. And we already have some staff members that are in the process of developing new courses to be offered. And that will continue through, as you can see, throughout the summer. Our focus next year is to start thinking about new credit requirements, move forward with those course proposals, and really start to dig in with that professional development that we've all been talking about. There's a commitment on the district level to increase the amount of professional development. If anybody's seen the draft calendar for next year, we have 7 opportunities as opposed to 3. And currently working on that professional development committee. I've seen some pretty good drafts as to the amount of time that will be allocated to district initiatives, as well as time directed towards our building initiatives. The other nice thing about that is that many of the district initiatives, they tend to dovetail really nicely with the direction that the high school is going. So we've had a commitment from some of our directors that they say, we will work together with you so we can be efficient in what we do. And if there's something that is a district initiative and there's something that's a building initiative that go hand in hand, we will coordinate those efforts so that there's some efficiency in the professional development. For instance, the science department is going through a revamp with the way that they develop and teach their curriculum. It's more phenomenon-based and really digging deeper and looking to build that rigor. Well, what a good time to do that if you're thinking about finding a way to, doing that on a 53-minute period would be kind of difficult. But now when you have an opportunity to expand that, and then you have to start thinking about the pedagogy behind it, you know, how it is that you're going to teach, we now have that opportunity to do both. We can start looking at doing, changing the curriculum because it's right for kids, and then in doing so, we can develop our strategies as teachers to become more efficient at how we deliver it. And so we have a lot of good opportunities in front of us, and we have a schedule, rough idea of how we're going to use the time to get ready for 2025, 2026.
So if we peel back the curtain, the previous slide made it look really easy, right? We've just got these couple little things we're going to do. But in reality, we actually have quite a bit of work ahead of us. And so one of the pieces that came out of that universal design was a lot of conversation with staff about once we make the recommendation and we get support from the district and the board, how do we make this happen? And so we created 3 different working groups at the high school, one with an academic focus, one with a culture focus, and one focused on student engagement. So the academic team is going to be looking at graduation requirements, which we've talked about. Another way to think about it is currently we require our students to graduate with 89% of courses taken, whereas comparatively Wayzata has 91% required. So we'll do some data digging and look at what other comparable high schools have. We'll look at incoming requirements of courses like the personal finance and look at what we should be asking of our students. I get really jazzed and geeked out about the new courses when I think about what the labor market data is suggesting in terms of future careers and pathways for our students. Our current registration guide we built based on current courses, but as we have opportunities for kids to take new things, what kinds of careers are our kids going to be walking into? What kinds of workplace skills will they be asked to do? And so how can we help support and build new courses to match what they're going to see in college and career? We talked about the year-long touch points and some instructional support. Related to culture, you heard us talk about attendance. As a little sidebar, one of the things that we heard from students at both high schools was that students mentioned that because so much content happened in a block, missing one day of school almost felt like 2, and they saw attendance rates improve with those longer blocks because they knew the importance of having to be there. We'll talk about office hours and other types of interventions that can be better built into the school day now that we have more options. Looking at the personalized learning plan, you heard Mr. Bach talk about an opportunity for a 9th grade seminar and how can we build common experiences from 9 to 12. And then looking at student engagement, we're looking at possibly implementing a capstone experience that stems from pathways, leadership, and civic engagement. Some of the schools we visited actually had credit earning peer tutoring programs. So how can we leverage our students to help support and mentor and tutor other students? Building a community service, which we piloted this year in our Pathways program, in additional student leadership experiences to have our students be part of the conversations to build the programming that they want. So we've already actually started meeting. Our academic team met last week. I know our student engagement culture met today. Student engagement meets tomorrow. We have over 20 members on every single team, so you're seeing a high percentage of staff engaged and excited and being part of the work. So we're already rolling in terms of having conversations about what we want this to look like and what it needs to look like for our students.
And we'll just close, I guess, with this idea. The idea that, I talked at the beginning about how the evolution of a high school schedule is not an abnormal thing. This happens, and we absolutely view this as an opportunity. We see the current schedule as representing shortcomings for our students. We think that everything that we have talked about represents a better opportunity for students. And I'm going to give our staff a huge amount of credit because, as Amanda said, they have embraced this with a growth mindset. And when we think about what this does for students, again, when you open up all of these additional opportunities for students, we know that we need to be creative with that too, right? So as students now all of a sudden have the opportunity to take more electives, how do we ensure that we're offering things that are relevant to students? How cool would it be to offer a course on artificial intelligence, which we know is right around the corner? How cool would it be to offer a course on aviation or things like that, which our kids who are go off to UND to explore? This schedule gives us the vehicle to be able to do that. And in addition to that, we talked about the 9th grade seminar piece. We talk all the time about trying to give kids the organizational tools to succeed in high school. We talked to them about how to take notes, how to use a planner, but all of that stuff right now is on the fly. And this represents a way to embed that in. We talked about the capstone. How cool would it be to capitalize on the community service aspects that our students are already engaged in, or the pathways experiences that students are already engaged in, and actually set that as a requirement where we say, you know what? Because at Stillwater, we learn not for school, but for life. If we're really gonna say that's our motto, let's put our money where our mouth is, and this is an opportunity to actually require that as part of the high school experience. I think it's different, and I think it would set our kids head and shoulders and light years above kids that are going to other schools and having other experiences. And when I think about the work that Rachel and Bob Manning did with our Pathways, we just had a Pathways Day not too long ago. Tremendous day, tremendous programming. And yet, because it feels like an alternate day, we're struggling to hammer the point home to kids that this is important and this is part of your experience. You need to come. Kids are viewing this as, oh, I don't have to go to school on that day because it's Pathways Day. And they're missing out on all kinds of stuff. I can't tell you the number of kids that I talked to the next day that actually said, hey, what was that deal again? Oh, yeah, you know what? That actually sounded really cool. I heard this thing was really cool. Yeah, it was really cool. We needed you there. What this schedule does is it gives us a vehicle to be able to embed that as part of the experience so that it's not done on the fly and it's not done as a one-off. And I think that it absolutely has the potential to be a game changer for our students. Our students will benefit.
One thing that I had, if you go back to the additional considerations, one thing that captured my interest was the space needs. And is that, what is that? What are the space needs? I mean, does the size of your high school support this?
Well, it'll work. The bottom line is it's not as efficient a schedule, right? And so what that means is, right now, if I'm a math teacher and I have my own classroom, air quotes around own, most of our math teachers right now probably teach 5 out of 6. And then on the one period that they have their prep, they can enjoy their classroom space, and they'll use that to grade papers or plan and prep for their next period. Because now we only have 4 buckets instead of 6 buckets to land in, but we also have more choices for kids. We have more classes. What that probably means is that if I'm a teacher now and I'm teaching 3 out of 4, because that's only a 75% efficient schedule as opposed to 5 out of 6, which is 83%, we're gonna need 8% more classroom space, which means that don't worry, I'm not saying we have to build onto the high school. What I am saying though is that there's probably several classrooms that are gonna have to get earmarked where, again, if I'm the chemistry teacher teaching 3 out of 4, on my prep, there's probably gonna be another chemistry class that's being taught in that space. And I can stay there and continue to do my thing, or maybe I need to go to, if I want privacy to either do my grading or my planning or whatever, I'll find a teacher collaborative space to do that in rather than doing that in my own private classroom.
Okay. And do we have teacher collaborative spaces at the high school? I don't know. We do. Okay.
We do.
Thank you. That was just one. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. First and foremost, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you. I don't think you get the credit that you truly deserve. I say this because I think we have one of the best schools in the state of Minnesota. I'm really proud of what we've been able to achieve here at Stillwater. I say it everywhere. And the reason I say this is this is very intentional. I'm excited about what you have here. What you had before was great, but this right here, I think, because I remember when my kids wanted to take electives, they could only take 2 electives. So they wanted to take something else, but they couldn't. Now, why aren't you taking this? Mom, I can't take it. I have to drop this. So this is very promising. So I'm really thankful for giving our kids, the space to be able to do this. Another thing, too, is I don't know if you get feedback from most of our kids that have graduated, gone on to college, because I think you should know, and I think I've told did I just blank right now? So I know I've told you, right? Something is happening here. Same here. But I need you to know this. The way we prepare our kids, the way you all prepare our kids, you may not know this, but they're very well prepared when they go to college. I can say that for both of my kids. And both of them did give feedback to their dad, not to me, that Mom, it was like most of the classes they took in their first year was like a repetition for both of them. It was that easy, So I think you need to know how well you prepare our kids when they go out there, when they go to college, regardless of the class, regardless of the courses they're reading in school. I just need you to know that and to really commend your effort because coming from here, from a mom who has experienced that, because the transition is one of the most difficult for kids, coming from high school to college. But you all do a great job, and so I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to also piggyback on Dr. Purvani's comments is just a comment of gratitude. So thank you all for your time and collaboration and extra work above and beyond all these things that you already do. So I can tell that a lot of thought went into that, and and it's exciting to see kind of how everyone brought their own different lenses, and to kind of touch upon Dr. Purvani's point of just being intentional about being future ready. And that's what I'm really excited about, is that as things continue to evolve and some of the challenges of public education, what can we do as a district, which we do things really, really well. We're an awesome district. We do things phenomenally well, but there's always opportunities to do things better. And, maybe with some of these schedule issues in the past, there's been some opportunity costs that students have been missing out on some things. And I came in with some reservations potentially around how can students balance some of these extracurricular or electives, whether it be performing arts or world language or journalism, as you mentioned, Principal Bach. But obviously having the be able to use the kind of the various 4x4 variations within the same framework of the master schedule sounds like offers a lot of flexibility to meet the needs of students. So, so I just, I'm really excited to see what this might look like, and I think it's going to serve our students really well. Some of the question I had is around some of the measurable outcomes. And I know some of the research was inconclusive, Rachel, as you kind of mentioned, around certain things. But like absences, it sounds like that is maybe an opportunity to increase that because of students missing out, and suddenly they're behind, and they're like, well, what's the point? So I'm assuming that would also potentially help failure rate. Any research around just student achievement outcomes that we can measure as well from that end, or?
That was one of the, I do remember that was one of the more inconclusive. It was kind of spread evenly among different schedules, the academic achievement and like test score achievement. It was all kind of, it was like a wash. There wasn't really any one that was like higher than the other. So that's what I remember from our research, yeah.
Just to provide some more clarification on that with the research that was done, essentially what they were looking at was the type of factors that can impact student achievement, right? And so when you look at the various factors, and there's about 200 plus of them, and they're all broken down into different whether it's community, students, teacher, right, that kind of piece. But when you look at those factors that impact student achievement, what it was found is that just by the framework of your schedule, that didn't necessarily connect in certain ways, right? Like there wasn't a strong correlation that way. But what they did say, and what I want to highlight here, is by doing these types of things and being intentional about what we're hoping to achieve with these goals and these priorities, and being purposeful with that, and by providing those additional opportunities, those were the types of things that really ended up impacting those student achievement pieces. So the schedule itself wasn't necessarily the piece, and I think that was also shared qualitatively from the site visits, it wasn't necessarily the framework of the schedule, but it was the opportunity of being purposeful with these things, and that these were the things that ended up having that impact on the achievement.
And I'll just piggyback on that it'll be the schedule in conjunction with the work of our leadership team and the action cards, because many of those kinds of things that you mentioned, failure rate, attendance, some of those pieces I can speak to Matt. I'm pointing at Matt because that's his action card team. But those will also be happening alongside the implementation of the schedule.
Really quick, before I go to these other questions, I just wanted to give Sam a minute, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. It sounds like you and some other students maybe were a part of this process, or can you explain maybe your role in this and some of the students and what your thoughts were when you?
Yeah, with the visit, we had a couple underclassmen, like freshmen, sophomores, go and visit these schools and interact with students and really see what worked. And I think kind of the same things that have been said, that 6 classes is a lot in one day, and I think that's something that students have kind of experienced, and I know from personal experience it's hard. It's hard to manage 6 classes, and if you're talking about 7 classes, that gets to be even more. And then obviously with the elective opportunities, there just needs to be more opportunities. It's like in middle school, I was in choir and it was something I really cared about. And then going into high school, I kind of had to make a decision on whether or not I continue with that. And it was something that I couldn't continue with. So having more opportunities, and especially with the new electives that are being brought into school that should be required, personal finance, that's very important to students. That's something that you should have the opportunity to take. And then cultural and ethnic studies, I know I've talked to a number of students that have said that's very important to them, and I think it's something that should be mandated. And I think that with our growing diversity at Stillwater, that is something that could be positive for our school. The other point I wanted to talk about was the AP class kind of problem that we looked at, and I think with the skinnies, that's a good approach to it. But I've also talked to some friends from different schools who run a different schedule. I think some students on a trimester schedule had their AP classes where their third trimester they wouldn't have the class and then they have to go into the test. And I think something they did to prepare for that was review sessions, and they seemed to think that was very helpful. So I think that is also a potential opportunity for us. And I really do think that no matter what we do with this as far as AP tests goes, I think students will still thrive, and I think the data is quite clear with that.
When you talked to the students, where did they like the 4x4? Was that their preference, or was there strong feelings about it?
Student council, we had a meeting after the tours, and we talked about the different options and kind of how they ranked for us. And I think with our priorities being 6 classes is too many, and there's not enough opportunities for electives, the 4x4 was the #1 choice from student council, from our discussion, and the 7x2 modified was the second. Our current 6x2 was third, and then fourth was a 7x2 schedule. So really big emphasis on kind of how many classes you have a day, avoiding burnout, and then also having more opportunities for elective classes.
Thank you. I also appreciated your comment because I personally have had a son that was huge into the music program and couldn't take advantage of the awesome electives that we have as a district because he wanted to take that foreign language and then also have music, which worked for him, but I think he missed out on a lot of some really good elective courses. But I never really thought about it on the flip side, that there are people that really love music and then they can't pursue it in high school because they go another path. So you might be gaining some participants in some of these programs. So to look at it from that other angle, I appreciate that.
I think with the schedule, there just really is so much opportunity to be flexible. And I think that's something I'm really excited about is to see where that goes and just having the opportunities. I think with the point about math classes and how you can really progress in that, I have a number of friends that are in PSEO courses and have gone past multivariable calculus, and they're doing that 2 classes a year. And I think that is very important to me because this year I wanted to take Calc BC, but like Mr. Bach said, it wasn't offered. So I had to do a lot of work with my counselor to find a suitable substitute for that class, and it was a difficult challenge to kind of set in. And I wish that I could have gone farther in math, but I only got to Calc 2 this year, so I think that's another point.
You're such an underachiever, Sam. Come on. No, that's really good feedback, good comments. And I would just want to say thank you to the team for making sure the students were involved in the process, because that's really important to the board that that student voice is present throughout. And hopefully even as you have these other work groups, there might be places for the students to get involved again too. So I see lots of questions. So let me go Petrie, and then we'll go to Lauer and Kelsenberg.
So I just want to join my colleagues in thanking you for this presentation tonight. Principal Brock, I see you brought your A-team, and it's very interesting to listen to this presentation because the opportunity, there seems to be so much opportunity there in terms of meeting the needs of the students, which it doesn't seem as though the schedule that we've had for 20 years now is really doing the trick, especially if the legislature keeps giving us all these, mandates about how we're supposed to put things into our schedule. But the one thing that and it seems as though the train has left the station because you've got the working groups and they're already meeting. And one thing that we didn't hear anything about tonight is cost. And so maybe that is a Dr. Funk question. What is this going to cost?
I'm texting Mark to have him turn the fans on, but we don't have any fans here, so I don't know what he's gonna do.
Is that a cost issue too?
So when we were looking at, I'll go back to what we talked about last spring when we were looking at schedule options. I think if you were looking at a 7-period day or a block, adding more electives adds more staff. And I think the estimate was somewhere around $1 million plus for that. So at the beginning of this, when I said, as we look at this is a potential opportunity, what we have to do at the district level, and I know you've already had at least one meeting with Marie as our finance director, figure out, okay, how do we make this happen if this is a priority for the district, and in our tight budget situation we're in. So that is something that, I think what you saw tonight is here's where we are, here's kind of, we're at the starting line, we're looking at different pieces here. And we've had some initial discussions at the central office. As Matt starts to flesh out the schedule some more, I think later on this summer we'll have some more probably realistic, okay, what are we really going to take a look at as needs for staff? One of the things that I heard is there may be more opportunity for college in the schools. If that's the case, that would potentially reduce the impact of the number of students we have going to PSEO. And because what we do right now is, and we just discovered this earlier this spring, is we staff for a full high school. But if we have a few hundred students who are taking PSEO classes someplace, then do we need to staff for a full high school, or do we need to staff for, less than the full, because the number of them are going somewhere else? So those are factors we have to take a look into. And we would certainly, what I imagine is sometime later this summer, as we're getting ready to start up the school year, probably come back and give the board an update on, okay, where things are at, and does this look realistic? Is this something that we can do as a district here? I think the healthier we get financially, I think the opportunity is clearly a great one for our students. We just have to balance it with the needs we have financially.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
You bet.
Director Lauer?
Well, fortunately,
brilliant.
now I don't have to be the
Okay.
wet blanket and talk about
I know, I
money,
was gonna-
'cause that was what I wanted to
We
talk
all-
about. So instead, I just get the opportunity to say thank you. 'Cause, I mean, really, the level of preparation shows professionalism and the care that you guys put into your work every day. And that means a lot. Having a kid in the high school, it's good to know that he's in good hands and that you're looking at his future. So I really do appreciate that. And, I mean, intuitively, and with the options presented, this schedule makes a lot of sense. It feels like more, the ability to focus in on things more and still see more class opportunities is fabulous. So I hope the numbers work out.
Dr. Kelsenberg?
I kept hoping somebody was gonna ask that question, but maybe time to spill the tea. SWOT, the threats. What other threats might there be beside the cost, if any? On your SWOT analysis?
I would say in addition to the costs, I think some of that gets encompassed here, right? So professional development, for example, that's gonna cost money, right? The time to do this is what leaves the plate in order for this good work to be done. right? So there's some threats that way too, in terms of just like time. Again, we've talked a lot about increasing opportunities and being really intentional about that and purposeful with it. And so sometimes when you're trying to do those types of things, you don't want to necessarily rush things, but we do have to be on a timeline too. And so a couple of those threats come to my mind of the professional development and really just the time to do that. Because to do this well, that's what it will take. And we want to do it well. Like, why would we take all this time and this energy to propose this, do all the research that we're doing, put together a plan and actually enact that plan and not put together the best product that we can? So those would be a couple things that come to my mind.
Yes, I haven't gotten you in a while.
Thank you. Actually, that was a great question, because I was kind of leading into that as well. Just when I guess I just have a bunch of comments first, and I do have a question at the end. In kind of processing the opportunities here, and I can tell you guys put a lot of work and thought into the great things that we can be doing with a new schedule. I guess I was kind of getting hung up on a couple areas, and those areas would be the transition time, which you're bringing up with the professional development. I really appreciate that there's forethought going into that in both the teaching piece of being able to transition the curriculum, and then also the first couple years where the students are transitioning to a new pace, a much faster pace, and kind of how that will impact, going to our next presentation, that absenteeism rate. I know that you mentioned that a lot of kids valued their days a little more and started showing up more, but as we learn about our chronic absenteeism, I feel like that could be exacerbated with this kind of a schedule. And those are the kids who, when they fall behind, they'll fall behind even faster. And I know that in a 4x4, potentially there's more opportunities to make up classes that were missed or lost. So in theory, maybe that'll be a wash, but that was one of the concerns I had with just the chronic absenteeism. And then, yeah, just that transition piece, the schedule. There was another one that I'm blanking on. I guess the other piece that I was hoping to get in the presentation was a little more about Edina and their 7x2 modified block, or modified schedule. I guess I don't know if it's a block or not. It's a confusing schedule. But I'm kind of wondering if somebody could talk about that and how the 4x4 kind of rose to the top as an option versus the 7x2 modified.
I mean, I kind of, when we were doing all of this, the 7x2 modified kind of became my baby because it seemed to me like the perfect kind of combination between a block and like what we have now. But I think what ended up coming out of it is kind of goes to a bunch of the points that Sam made. Like for students, they would still be juggling 7 classes at a time. The amount of elective credits that they could get ended up not actually being much more than what we have now. So it wouldn't really solve the problem of giving kids more opportunities. They would have more time in their classes certain days of the week with that one, depending on how creative we got with it. They could have some of the opportunities with that one where they could have had a couple of more opportunities for, say, like the office hours that we do now. But I think when it came down to it, it wouldn't have helped with kind of the big ticket items like that we had based our rubric on, and kind of what we heard staff saying and what we heard students saying and what we heard from families too. I think it would have kind of muddied the waters a little bit more than a 4x4 might have.
And to be honest too, the feedback that we got from the Edina staff members was kind of tepid in that regard too. They were kind of thinking that one of the comments was, oh gosh, if you do this, we'd love to work with you because now we could learn from what you can learn from our mistakes and you could help us improve what we have. So, I think that to your point, there was just a little bit, it was a little bit muddier in terms of, how it would meet the goals of our rubric and our kids.
I'll just piggyback, and Amanda hit the nail on the head. It goes back to the 3 goals. So as I think about the discussion with the leadership team, as we're really getting into the nitty gritty of, all right, we need to start making choices now. We have some options on the board. How do we move this thing forward? The factors came down to goal number 1 was more electives, right? And so if we're offering more electives, the 4x4 actually offered more electives. So if that really is truly a goal, this accomplished that. The second big goal that we had centered around student mental health. And at the end of the day, that modified 7 period adds a class to student schedules. They're now juggling 7 periods a day and 7 classes at one time, not a day, sorry, but 7 classes at one time as opposed to 4. And I think that was a theme that came through from the people that felt strongly about the block. And as that conversation kind of started ebbing that direction, that was a really, really strong piece that that ultimately came out. There's a consistency in the 4x4 schedule that was not present necessarily in another one that I think resonated with some people too. And as Doug said, it's tough to argue with the idea that when Wayzata, who's on the 4x4 block, actually talked about, hey, maybe we need to take a step back for whether it's a cost budget crunch or whatever. Next thing they knew, they had 2,500 signatures on a petition saying, do not take this away. This is part of the unique experience that our students have. And we didn't get that response at any of the other places that we visited or any of the other research that we did. And so, I don't know, I think that those are all reasons that tie into your question.
Yes, Director Petrie.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the timing. So you're talking about implementing this for the 25-26 school year. That's like 15 months away, and it coincides with 2 big changes that we are going to make in this district, one having to do with the calendar and one is flipping the schedule. I mean, I'm terrified. Aren't you guys a little terrified by this timing?
I think the most frequent question I'm fielding is, so when do I have to have my course proposal done into CAC? I mean, as you do kind of the math backwards, it's typically been October. So to get the registration guide ready, usually first draft comes out in November to get ready for January. So I think there will be a little crunch in the near term. But in terms of the professional development Doug talked about, that schedule does afford us a lot of time to actually begin looking at the instructional practice and writing new courses. And we don't have to have 100 new courses by the first day of school. We can expand what we currently offer and figure out those targeted areas. Like tomorrow we have a student focus group to actually look at an AI class that Mr. Bach was talking about and some other opportunities. But we might have a near-term crunch point, but then long-term we can kind of settle in.
And one other thing that we talked about is with the change that our community members are going to be looking at with start times and with calendar, and then bringing in a new schedule. One thing to consider is to jump into a schedule with a new start time and a different calendar, a new calendar, and then follow that the next year with a new high school schedule. It kind of makes sense if you're going to change at one time. Change at one time. Allow our families to experience change one time rather than spread out over a couple different years.
Yes.
So Principal Bach, you kind of touched upon it, and that was kind of a question I had around kind of the feedback you got from Wayzata with their 4x4. And, as a board director, obviously, I feel really good about having our district leadership team, our leaders at the high school, the working groups, the subject matter experts that are driving this really important decision. And then as a board director standpoint, obviously, we have to look at it from a budgetary standpoint. And, within the current realities of where things are at, and I know from the May 23 presentation, I think it was like 1.4 million, would be the potential cost, which is, significant in light of where we're at. But, as you had those conversations with your counterparts at Wayzata, and they work through their process, because I think as a board, sometimes it's easy to say, okay, let's just look at the numbers. And I don't want us to be a penny wise and a pound foolish. And in those conversations you had, was it just something they felt that, obviously after significant pushback, but they felt this is too important and too impactful to students to take away because it's going to, really take away from their experience as a whole. Can you share more in terms of what you were able to from those conversations?
Yeah, that's basically the gist of it. I'll go back to, again, what Sam was talking about. we took 4 underclassmen with us. So we were pretty intentional about who we were taking. We took 2 ninth graders and 2 10th graders on our team. And because we wanted students who were actually going to potentially be a part of this change to experience it and to get that feedback. They went into it with some trepidation on the front end. I actually made them go to a math class because they were nervous about that. And like, what is math going to look like on 85 minutes? And they came out because, again, as Doug talked about, your instruction needs to look different. You can't just continue to teach the same way and expect that this is going to work. You have to teach differently. And so you start lesson planning differently. You start finding different segments, different modes of learning to tap into, and suddenly students find themselves more engaged. And the feedback that we got from students coming out was, it didn't feel like 85 minutes. I was worried I was going to be bored by the end of that. I didn't know what I was going to do with my time, but it didn't feel like 85 minutes. And it felt like all of a sudden, the end of the day was here, and it felt really good. And that's the kind of feedback that I think they're getting from their students. And so again, when you have 2,500 signatures that show up saying, you need to keep this, don't consider this, find other areas to cut, I think that speaks to, again, just as Dr. Funk talked about, as Matt talked about, it's what do we prioritize? And again, as Mr. Kraft talked about, I'll slide him some money later to let Dr. Funk know, yep, we actually did pay attention to those vision cards. We're using them. This aligns with that process. That's what the vision card is all about. And if that's a priority and the areas that those things highlight are priorities, this ties in with that.
Looking at, did you see any impact at Wayzata, I guess, and I hate to use, just maybe you've researched other schools that are on the block schedule. Does their PSEO enrollment go up or down? Because I know when you enroll in PSEO, we don't get as much funding per ADM, right? Like I forget what the percent is.
Yeah,
does
both
it go
Edina
up?
and Wayzata saw their PSEO enrollment go down, partly because the schedule was constrictive. They couldn't go to PSEO and come back as easily on a block schedule as they can on our current 6-period day.
Okay, so there would be some funding perhaps coming back from if that number went down in our district.
And more elective opportunities within the high school.
Exactly. Okay.
That was the qualitative piece that I got from the principals, was that our kids don't want to leave for PSU. Our
Right.
kids are finding what they want right here. And if you can find it in your own backyard, that's a more attractive piece. And again, we'd like to be able to capitalize on that too.
Great. Any other questions?
The only other thing I've gotten, it's more of I don't know, just something's been rattling around in my head for the since we started looking at this. As we've been making this movement, we're going to change the start time of the school. We're going to change the calendar. And we change this too. If we do it all at once, yes, I love the idea of ripping off the Band-Aid and only experiencing the turmoil one time. But from a...
It'll be great turmoil though.
It'll be wonderful. Let's call it a scientific standpoint. We're so much of what we're trying to do is impact student mental health. And we've got these 3 things that we say are going to impact that, but do we know once we do it, which one or 2 or all 3 of them actually had an impact on student mental health positively or negatively? It feels a little chaotic. And maybe it's just, you just do it and the end result is the end result, but it would be nice to be able to say, we know that by going to a block schedule, everybody's happier or, whatever.
We have a tool we use in the elementary. We are piloting at the high school. And Paul Lee could talk more about this, but that really surveys students on mental health. And so we could develop a baseline next year perhaps. Not if we're gonna be ready full-blown to go with the high school next year. But that is a tool, we could take a look at that. But again, if we do it all at once, you're not gonna know which was the factor.
I'll just share with you too, and we talked about this at the presentation that I delivered last spring, but again, we did survey students back in 2020, 2021, when we dabbled a little bit with the experimental schedule through COVID. And it was kind of like a mini block schedule. So, you know, students had 6 classes, but we kind of went a block of 3 on one day, a block of 3 on the next day, or sorry, a block of 3 in one quarter, and then a block of 3 in another quarter. And we surveyed students and parents after that just to say, hey, we kind of did this with the intention of trying to address mental health. Did this translate, yes or no? And the feedback that came back was yes, this positively impacted our students' mental health. To Dr. Funk's point, if we're changing 3 things, yep, I'm a science teacher, right? I get it. One control variable at a time. That this is not a very good experiment if we want to figure out which of these things is causing it. At the end of the day, as your high school principal, I don't care, quite honestly, which one of the 3 it is. I care that student mental health gets addressed. And if this is a way to do that, along with those other pieces, lump it all in. I want our kids to feel safe and feel good about coming back to school, and that's what we need, and that's what we're trying to address through this.
And it feels like there's just always going to be multiple variables. I mean, we're thinking of the schedule and the start time, but could it be a change in staffing? Could it be a change in professional development, or could it be, I mean, there's just it's so hard, I feel like.
We're changing students too. I mean, that's one of the challenges with educational research is you're never going to get a perfect apples to apples comparison. There's constantly data points that are involved in your experiment that are changing, and it's impossible to whittle that down to a control variable and draw that. But yeah, to your point.
And I think from my standpoint, my concern on the timing is I look at the calendar and the time change, you know, there's work involved, but they're relatively minor changes. I know that's an opinion, not a fact, but I just look at those as minor. This, to me, is a little bit more system-wide major, and I'm worried about teacher mental health. And, you know, we talk about, I think it would be easier for students, but I want to make sure that when we're doing this, that we're planning for it to be really rigorous and intentional and beneficial academically as well as mental health component. I just want to make sure we give our staff time to really deliberately design their curriculum and their instructional practices around this new model. My son loved the modified COVID learning for a lot of reasons. I think as a parent, I didn't feel like it was as rigorous as he got and I think that's just because it was online, where this is in person, so that will be gone. But I do think that doing it in a rushed fashion just
You don't want to rush to failure. You don't want to rush to failure.
Yeah, I want this to be successful, sustainable, and so I look at this change as more complex potentially. But again, that's just my opinion, and I would leave it to the experts. You guys are all more than confident and capable, and Dr. Funk, and I'm looking at Marie from the number crunching, but I think from a board, I don't want to be in a position where, I mean, we have our fund balance. We talk, you know, we have our priority, that's small. We have our priority-based budgeting, so what is going to leave, you know, to do something like this, which I think we all agree has the potential just to be a game changer for our community and our students and our staff. And so I look forward to those conversations to feel comfortable financially, because I wouldn't want to implement something and have staff do all of this work, and then we find out that we can't sustain it from a budgetary perspective, and we're back to a 6x2. I mean, how crushing would that be for staff? So I just want to make sure that we have that ground solid first. So that would be just mine. But again, I just am so impressed at the level of detail in this presentation, and the time to go do the tours, the time to engage the students in the process. I mean, those are things that don't always happen based on my observation. And you kind of checked all the boxes, and I appreciate the conversations you're having with staff with those full year touch point courses, identifying those as a music family. And I know I'm not alone at the board table as someone who's been in music or world language or, you know, different touch points that might need some finessing. So I appreciate all of that attention to detail. So thank you. Dr. Porbetti?
Thank you. I do remember your name now. Dr. Funk, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I mean, you're right. You know, this is very important. Personally, if, you know, truthfully, I would say go for it right now, as in today. So just so we want to make sure we have the funding for it. This is, to me, it's priority. This is very, and we've been talking about mental health, but we've been talking about student mental health for a while now, and these are opportunities that can be put in place. You know, you're right. These are opportunities that can be put in place that will give us the opportunity to actually see change happen in different ways. You know, where students have the flexibility to now do what they need to do, so they have that time. So it's a great opportunity. It's something that I really do believe that we have to somehow find funds for it and try to make sure it's sustained. This is a change after a few years you won't even remember, because then things would have improved so much. And I would say within the last 4 years, we've taken a lot of challenges. The board has taken a lot of challenges. We've moved towards the right direction in so many ways, whether it's, you know, financial, whether it's, you know, all the types of things that we've done. And you can see all of the challenges that we've had. You've seen the results that have happened. I think this is one of it too. So whatever we can do to make sure that we have the money and are able to sustain it, I think we should go for it.
Thank you. Any other final comments? I mean, we'll.
I was gonna say, I think we need to leave right after that. That's getting late.
Is there a mic you can draw?
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
It does. Well, thank you so much, and we look forward to continuing the conversation and taking it, you know, to its next logical step. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
All right. We have another learning session. I want to be mindful if anyone needs like a 5-minute break. I know that Dr. Funk wouldn't like that, but if anyone does, let me know. Otherwise, we'll jump right into the attendance. We're good?
We're good.
Okay, we're good. Attendance it is then.
You could go, but don't be late for the attendance presentation.
Yeah. Don't be late. Hi. Welcome.
Hello,
All
good
right.
evening.
So this is our next study session, and this is Paul Lee and Don, welcome, to talk attendance with us, so.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us to talk on this
Yeah.
topic. And you can see the relevance of it, as you just heard, and all the exciting things that the high school team is doing. And part of that is with the goal of, you know, recognizing and increasing the attendance at the high school. This report will, you know, we're going to be looking at, you know, K, our littlest learners, all the way up through high school. So it's not an issue or concern that's isolated to the high school as we go through that. But what we'd like to do is go through a little bit of data first and run through some data. And then Dawn's going to take over at that point and talk about some of the why, the what, the how are we going to address it, or how are we addressing it, and some of those components. So with that said, we'll just get started. With any good data set, it's always good to have some definitions. And this one's kind of particularly important when you look at attendance data, because it's reported different ways by different organizations. But the two main ones, and that will be, you're going to be kind of looking at with some of the data today, is the term chronic absenteeism. And what that really stands for is that students who miss 10% or more of school days during the school year are identified as being chronic absent. And if you kind of put that in perspective, 10% of our school days is about 18 days. So 18 days or more that a student would be absent for any reason, except for like a school-sponsored activity, would be considered absent and chronic. And that's a federal measure, so that's why you see that in some of the federal data that you might see regarding school districts around the nation. Consistent attendance is kind of the opposite of that. It's the flip side. And consistent attendance means students who attend more than 90% of the days are considered consistently attending. And that terminology is used more by the Minnesota Department of Education, and it is the way in which we need to report under Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. So keep that in mind, and we'll come back to it. And you'll see on the slides, there's a little, like the little red box there. It kind of helps keeping that definition right there for you. So now, many of you, and I'm sure most of you, on I believe it was March 29th, the New York Times came out with a big report on the national crisis, you could say, regarding attendance in public schools. So there was data that was pulled from that exact report on a national level. And there is a link too, if you want to jump into that report at any time later to look at if you hadn't seen that yet. But what they were reporting was over the last years, we had pre-COVID, you can see the chronic absent level nationwide was around 15%, 2016 through 2020. And that was pretty stable in that point. 2020, 21, we're right in the heart of COVID, schools close, no real reliable data is collected at a national level. We start returning back to school 21 and then 22, and then you see the national trend in the number of students that are identified as being chronically absent. And you see 28% and 24%, I believe that says, or 26.
Okay, Paul, can I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
Because this gets back to the definition.
Yes.
And I'm stuck here.
Yeah.
Why is the state different than the federal definition? Like, why is there two different definitions? Do we know?
Well, it's one's consistent, states are going to consistent attendance. The federal number is chronic absenteeism. I don't know why.
Okay.
But they're the same scale. I mean,
Same person. I'm just curious why the
different, yeah.
different definition.
What's funny to me is how far, like, it feels like consistent attendance is pretty good. Chronic absenteeism sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
But they're within one percentage of each other.
Right.
Right.
I know you can't change definitions, but.
Yeah,
No.
it's just odd to me.
Yes,
that's-
and we found that too. And so
Okay.
we spent a lot of time in preparing, and Carissa and John were all instrumental in preparing for this presentation.
Okay.
But we too kind of struggled with that. So as we go through, I think you'll see, especially the Minnesota or our way of doing it, makes a little more sense when we dig a little deeper into the data. So if we look, this is again national data. But what this is really representing is that from 2019 to 2023, you see that change in the level of chronic absence from that 15 to 26% for all students. And what they really found was, it was interesting because that gap was true for the richest districts in the nation, average districts, and poor districts. You see how a poor district started out with a little higher absentee rate and then grew, but it impacts all levels of education, institutions, and public schools. There is a little bit of difference, so you get specific around it, that some of the richer districts, it's about 19% difference, and in a poorer school, it's about 13%. So impact a little bit heavier on the poor communities with their public schools. Okay? So now we're shifting to this consistent attendance piece. So this is the number or the percentage of students that attend more than 90% of the school days during the school year. So in statewide, currently in Minnesota, it's 69.8%. Stillwater, you'll see there, 71.2%. Some comparative districts, in Prairie, 78.1, Prior Lake Savage, 79.5, and White Bear Lake, 61.3%. So we're not alone. We're not alone nationally. We're not alone in Minnesota, but definitely is a concern, and it's impacting kids.
Can I ask a question about this slide?
Yeah.
How do those other districts, how do their student bodies match up with ours?
I think Prior Lake Savage has always been a really good comparison to us as far as their makeup and the components of it.
All three of them are. These are the numbers you saw when we were looking at MCA data too. These are the most like comparable districts. So this is what we've been comparing to for MCA data when we look at a lot of those trend data, trying to just compare it to someone like.
Are any of them on the block schedule? Sorry, I'm just kind of no.
That's a good question. So we can, thank you. And Don can speak to this.
Yes, so you can see all of our schools listed here as far as that consistent attendance. And most of them fall into that 70 percentile range. You can see, though, there are a couple outliers, so I just want to point those out. Afton Lakeland is lower with 53.7%. Now, we think that that is inaccurate, but that is what is reported at MDE. We have, Principal Doe actually sent an email right when this data was released, asking for clarification. We think it has to do with our average daily attendance and how we internally reported that, but we have worked internally with John and their school and what they're working on as just to combat attendance in general to rectify that. We can't change it. Again, we think it's wrong, but we're just adapting and moving forward with that. And then you see a little bit lower at the high school, which we would anticipate. And then the ALC is low. That is a typical ALC number, and that's why students attend ALC, because attendance is a problem for them, and it's a different model. So, but otherwise, the other schools are pretty consistent as far as those percentages.
So ALC is factored outside of the high school for attendance, okay.
Yes.
It's pulled out.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask a
Yep,
quick question?
please.
I see that we're all our schools are below the 90% required by the state. Do we know why the attendance, why we're having these problems?
Yes, and that comes later, so we kind of give the rationale.
Okay.
Yes.
So this graph is kind of interesting. Really, I think why we wanted to really show this is really kind of the bounce back after COVID. So this is our data. There's a couple different components of it. In 2020-21, that was during COVID. How we took attendance was kind of up in the air. People would take attendance based on if a student connected to their Zoom class. Some people took attendance based on the completion of work. And so it's not a very consistent, it's really an outlier there, that 2020-21. In 21-22, again, we're still dealing with COVID and interruptions to school and how we were reporting schools' attendance being in virtual. But that was the year that, and that's why you'll see those other little graphs at the bottom that says the trending chronic and nearly chronic. There was a new implementation system in which the way we record our data, and then it goes to the state. So that's a little change there. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in the next slide. It'll make a little more sense. But then you get into 22-23 and 23-24, and you see kind of that, bounce back up to that 72 to 75% chronic. This is for attendance, for no absence issues. So that's what that looks like. And I'm going to explain the other ones here on the next slide so we can go. So if we go back, now we're going to start with that 22-23 data. And if we look at that, the consistent attendance is the green. If we move then to, and this is the data that we can now pull starting that academic year, and we look at, that's the consistent attendance. Over 90% of the time they are attending, the students, so less than 17. And then we separate out trending chronic. And so those are students that are missing 5% of the time in school, or up to 9 to 13 days. And then we have nearly chronic, and those are students that are at that 7.5% absenteeism rate. So that would be missing 13 to 17 days. And then we have the chronic absent, which is at 8.89. So again, when you look at that national data and our data, the national data is looking at that chronic absent level when they're reporting it. And we're looking at a much more deeper data because we're separating into 4 parts, as you can see there. So when we have kids that are in that, in the trending chronic, we kind of consider them kind of tier 1. They're on the radar where principals are looking at that. They're having conversations with families. Nearly chronic, kind of tier 2. It's a higher level of intervention, and Dawn will talk about that a little bit. And then the chronic absence is where it's kind of tier 3. more of a significant absenteeism, and the impact, obviously, on their education is much higher. So if we go to the next slide, this is the next year, 23-24, the current year. You'll see that our consistent attendance has gone up a little bit. The trending chronic has gone down a little bit, nearly chronic's gone down a little bit, and chronic absence has gone, it's about the same, but up a little bit. So we're seeing some movement in the trending chronic and nearly chronic. It's that 9.6% of our students that are chronically absent that we need to be very conscious of and aware of, and put interventions into place to support with that. This data isn't just another piece of data. This is showing grade level and the attendance using those same 4 criteria. So the green, no absence issues, trending chronic, nearly chronic, and then our chronically absent. You know, as you can see, not big, huge differentiation between grade levels. You see a little bit, it's interesting that the high school, the 12th grade year, the senior year, it decreases quite a bit. The chronic stays about the same, but it's that nearly chronic or trending chronic that reduces quite a bit. And kids are really attending at a higher level their 12th grade year than the other years. But I don't know, when I look at that, I see a little bit of concern regarding that consistency of that chronically absent right around that 14 to 13% at the secondary level. So that's what kind of how it breaks down by grade.
Okay. So now we're talking about why we think the students are missing school. So just a few things to discuss. We've had more illness, the triple-demic of COVID, influenza, RSV in the fall of 2023. And just a reminder, you know, the CDC just lifted late fall, or like November, I can't remember, maybe it was even January, when they lifted that the 5 days that you had to be absent if you tested positive for COVID. So that definitely has impacted. There's more awareness, which is a good thing, around staying home when you're sick. I think students, we have made it easier with assignments being available on Schoology and things like that, that if a student really isn't feeling well, they can stay home and not, you know, get behind. So that's a positive that they're not spreading the illness, but it counts towards the absences. We've seen, as the high school presentation, as the group presented, that we just have an increased mental health needs of our staff and our families and our students. And as we think about anxiety, depression, and stress, and that can be debilitating and make students stay home because of that. So, and then we have some students that go back to their home countries to see their families and support their needs, and that those trips take a bit longer. They might be 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and that's a reality. And then we have family trips, you know, people going on a trip that does not coincide with our natural break. So those are kind of some of the reasons that students are missing school. And then these are the frequent absence types. So you can see that excused illness is, you know, a high piece that we have. And then we have parent excused. Now that can be these trips, those different activities. We talked about, let's talk about kids that participate in youth sports outside of the high school. They might be in hockey, they might be in baseball, they might have tournaments that are far away, and sometimes on those Fridays they might need to leave early or miss that Friday to attend those events. So those kinds of things fall under the parent excused. And you can see obviously all the other ones. The ones that we would be most concerned about that, you know, Paul was addressing before are those unexcused absences that we don't really know why the students are gone. That tells us that those students are disengaged and there's a reason that they're not there. And those are the pieces of those chronic absences that we're trying to wrap around. And, you know, with elementary, we have to work with the families on that because that's such a, it's not always the student's fault that they're not making it to school. And then, you know, as they matriculate through the system, then we want to put some of that ownership on the students themselves.
Does unexcused absence general, does that mean the guardian isn't calling in at all? So that's like, there's no
no reason, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm, given.
So,
Mhm.
okay.
Yes, yeah, parent is not calling in and we don't even know where they are. Yeah. We know that attendance matters and we want, and you heard as we think about looking at implementing the block, that it will make a difference when you're doubling that size of what you would miss. And chronic absenteeism leads to higher dropout rates, and we are aware of that. And children that are frequently absent from school, they have less interpersonal skills than their peers, and we saw that during COVID when we didn't have any interaction. And then they reported themselves as experiencing greater school-related stress, lower levels of motivation, and lower levels of school belonging. When you get behind, you know, a student gets behind, then that stress level goes up because sometimes it feels like they can't catch up. And that's overwhelming, and then it's sometimes just easier to avoid altogether. And then that just becomes a cyclical pattern. So again, missing just 2 days per month can make a student fall behind their peers in math, reading, and those interpersonal skills. And from grades K through 5, just 1 day of missed school equals 2.5 days of lost learning in math and 1.5 days of lost language and literacy learning, which is, when you think about that, if a student misses 10 days, that's a lot of lost learning. And at the elementary, it's still harder. We don't have Schoology at the elementary. It's not like they can just jump on and access everything. There's more availability, but it's not the same as it is in middle school and high school.
Hey, Dawn. Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I'm really confused by that point.
Yes.
Could you explain how 1 day equals 2.5 days of learning?
That they start to fall behind that much more because the impact is that much time. You know, so if they're missing a lesson, it just pushes them back into
So
equaling.
it's relearning. Okay.
Does
Okay.
that?
I don't know how they ever figured that out, but
I know.
okay.
And the sources are there, but yeah, I'm not sure how they figured that out. I think it's just showing, you know, that a lot of our learning builds on, you know, the skills. And if you're missing some of those key skills, it is preventing you from going forward in another skill that builds utilizing that skill.
Okay.
You know, like, let's say you missed sounds, a sound or a blend. You know, you missed the SH lesson. Well, then you would have trouble with combining those words together as you are moving forward. So,
Okay.
if that, I'm trying to give you a concrete example, but
that helps a little.
yeah.
Thanks.
A middle school student that misses 2 or fewer days has a 93% chance of starting high school on track to graduate versus 66% for a child who misses 2 or more weeks. So obviously, we know that that pattern carries through, and you can see that typically with, even in elementary, attendance patterns tend to follow students all the way through if we don't get a handle on it. And by 9th grade, a week's absence each semester equals a drop of more than 20% in the likelihood of earning a diploma.
So it would be difficult for the student to catch up. You miss
Exactly.
classes, you can catch up with the next, you know, learning because you've missed what actually helps you to build on the next one.
Correct. Yep. So what are we doing to combat this? And schools each are doing this differently, but all of the schools are having weekly team meetings, schools, and not just bar schools, but part of the BAR spreadsheet when they're discussing students, and attendance is one of the pieces on that spreadsheet that they look at. We're trying to determine, you know, not only the concerns about student absences and how it's impacting them, but the why behind the student absence. You know, if there is a mental health need, how can we support the student better to help them feel connected to school so they want to be there. And then the staff comes up with, after they've determined that root cause, then they look at ways to develop interventions based on addressing those specific needs, whether it's working with the families, whether it's working with the student, whether it's working with both. You know, it's a collective partnership there. We have improved communication with parents regarding student absences, that we have automated messages that we implemented very strategically this year at all levels. Letters, part of that is by law we have to send those letters that they're reaching those pieces. Personal phone calls so that we're talking to people and trying to get the why so that we understand. You know, families might be in crisis and have a lot going on, and then they might just need some assistance about how to get the student there. And then again, connecting with our families and our students about the mental health resources that are available to them, or chemical health needs as they get older that could interfere with that attendance. You know, I think when we talked about schedules, the change in the schedules, hopefully with those older students, that sleep pattern and getting a little, you know, coming to school a little bit later will help with that too. So what are our next steps here? We want to look at our attendance policy and the process that we have with it and the procedures so it's clear to our families, it's clear to all of our staff that there's no surprises within that, and then continue to work with all the schools and the staffs to develop those interventions, to be creative in those interventions, and then thinking about, you know, launching a campaign or a communication campaign. Carissa thought of, you know, attendance matters and why some of this data, and, you know, how important it is for us to partner with families so that we can take this seriously and it will impact the learning. And that's the goal, is student success, that we want our students to be here so that they can get all the information and be successful learners and feel connected to the community.
I was at an event earlier today, and we were talking attendance at school, and the term I heard was, during COVID, we provided grace for families to help them work through this, and now we need to start focusing on grit. And you need to show up, you need to be here if your kids' needs are going to be met. So it's just a kind of a grit versus grace, something I had not heard before, but it's a interesting approach because, you know, from the New York Times article and from the podcast, they talked about families learned through COVID or experienced through COVID that schools gave a lot of grace and school's kind of optional. And we're seeing it in the bar graphs that were presented. And we want our students here so that we can help them achieve their full potential. And if they're not here, they are impacted. And so I think that's going to be part of our attendance matters discussion with families.
Do we have any data that correlates in our district achievement, like, or assessment data to attendance? Is that something we
have
could
all the
do?
data, and you could
You could
pull
draw
that-
inferences, whether there's correlation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was interesting, we talked about it, was when we looked at that Afton Lakeland data.
Right.
Going, this is
Right.
an anomaly, it's
Yep.
weird,
And it
right?
doesn't
And
match.
so, that's not a scientific term, weird, but there's a phenomenon, there's something happening there that doesn't seem right. Because it's particularly when you correlate that with their scores.
Yeah,
When
some
they're
of
about,
that.
they're right up there as the highest of our elementaries, and yet they have that really low attendance rate. So, you know, that would say, that's why we think that that data needs to be looked at a little bit closer, but, because it doesn't, I mean, that would be a reverse correlation.
Well, and I always remember it would be, I mean, we want our kids in school all the time, no matter where they are. But sometimes there's a difference when someone's absent, but they're, you know, ahead of the learning curve versus if they're, so I'm just curious if what we're seeing for absences, if there's any correlation to a lower achievement or assessment score, or if we could draw any kind of conclusion to that.
The other thing you could look at is grades in high school.
Yeah,
You know,
Right.
how does absences impact?
right. It would just be interesting to bring it to a more of a granular level in our district, what that means.
And I think they do in those team meetings. I think they dig in a lot further in looking at those grades. And there are those students, I mean, and this is something that we need to work on. There are students that are strong students that might miss a lot of school, but they're still performing well. They're still able to be successful, but we also need to make it relevant for them to be there too. And so what are we doing to challenge that as well? So that we just need to look at it from all angles, that, you know, if we're doing hands-on learning and really engaging learning opportunities, that's going to help our students want to come to school as well. So there's all kinds of factors associated with that.
Yeah. Dr. Petrie?
Thank you for all this information. It was really interesting. I wonder if some of it is kind of structural in the sense that we can't really do too much about it. I'm thinking now about the absences for illnesses, right? And that is probably going to subside over time, I would assume. But I wonder if some of it is perhaps a little bit more permanent in the sense that students and parents have gotten the idea that that you can grab content when you need it, you know, because lessons show up online, you know, whereas in the past that wasn't happening so much. And so, you know, that might require a different sort of approach by, you know, educating parents about that, right?
Correct.
I mean, because they're, you know, yes, they can probably keep from, you know, falling through the cracks entirely by accessing lessons online. But if they're not there in class, they're not going to get the full impact of that lesson.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things too that I think it was in the New York Times article, they talked about, I think it's more of an elementary level, but if 90% of the students in a classroom they found are absent, so that'd be like 3 students, maybe two to 3 students are absent, then the likelihood of more students being absent the next day goes significantly higher, because students see that there's some kids missing. Now they go, okay, maybe I'm not feeling very well, or maybe I should be not here tomorrow. So it's kind of that sense of, I think, with some type of an initiative about attendance matters, it matters to the whole learning community. You know, you may be gone because you're going to go to some real enrichment activity as a 5th grader with your family, but it does impact the rest of the kids in your classroom. You know, the more of the attendance in that classroom, the higher attendance for that whole classroom. So it becomes kind of a
And the impact of each student who's gone, they offer something different to the class.
Right. That sense of community.
Yes, Dr. Berman?
Thank you. Thank you. I think the pandemic, I mean, you're right, you know, grace during the pandemic and great afterwards. I think the pandemic actually exposed the beast because you have it in kids. It's also adult behavior. A lot of adults don't want to come to work. They don't want to work in the office. They want to stay remote. I mean, it's happening, you know, with adults as well, and it's a struggle. People take you to court just because you're not giving them remote opportunity. I mean, it's that bad. So you can imagine when kids wake up in the morning and I don't want to go to school. All I need to say is I have a headache, you know, and that's it. You know, so it's going to be a lot of work to change the behavior, both with the kids and also with parents, because it's no different with the adults.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's no different at all.
Right.
Dr. Kelsenberg?
Sure. I have a comment and then a question after. The attendance matters. I'm liking something here. I don't know if anybody else has seen it. You might be looking at it as a campaign to get people there, but what a positive message for the kids to be receiving. We want you. You are wanted here. You show them friends on the playground or whatever, you're wanted here. I think you could do a lot with that. And then earlier in the presentation, back to the 90% time, somebody's chronically absent if they're gone 10% of the time. If they're gone 20 or 30% of the time, does that skew all the average, or is that still just one person?
I believe it's one person. So it would be the percentage of, so when you look at that percentage number, it's the number that have gone beyond that threshold.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. I guess I have more of a comment, not so much a question for you guys. But going back to my previous comment in the last presentation, if we do end up moving into a block schedule, I have a lot of concerns around absenteeism. And not just, the chronic absenteeism, but like the vacations. You're gone for a week of school, you basically miss 2 weeks of curriculum and have to make that up. And then there's the shifting of the schedule to be later in the day, so then we're gonna have more sports kids. And none of these are total deal breakers, but I feel like there's a lot of variables that might impact our absenteeism for the worse, at least in the transition time. So I do appreciate that we're trying to be proactive and have a campaign to really alert parents, because a lot of absences for kids, maybe not a lot, but a lot of them, I guess, are because the parents. The parents are scheduling those vacations or those activities that they're going to be gone for. So just to kind of remind parents the importance of actually having your kids in school and not kind of heaping it onto the plate of, especially the older kids, to make it up when they come back and try to figure it out. And it concerns me that it's not surprising that our high schoolers have those higher rates. They do have a lot more freedom. So, but I'm actually more surprised about the elementary. The elementary rates are really surprising to me. And I guess I do have a question in this. I'm gonna get to it. I'm just curious, I saw just totally anecdotally over COVID, a lot more families took vacations just during the year, anytime. It was great. Not on spring break. I'm wondering, is that kind of a new trend? I kind of got that from the article, that people are just like, it's much cheaper now to travel in February.
Right, the airline tickets cost is much cheaper here than it is during that spring break time.
Right. So I feel like that's not on the kid. They just are going with their family. So kind of that education piece.
That idea about optional. It's optional. We can do that.
And I wonder if those vacations are different in high school versus elementary school. It would be curious to break that out at the high school, how many of those are vacations in high school, because it seems like that might go down a little bit versus like people in elementary think, I'm not missing that much. There's that attitude of they're young, the prioritizing that family versus in high school. Kids are taking AP classes or maybe PSEO or
and activity schedules help drive some of that.
Activities that I would think anecdotally maybe that would, but I don't know. It's just something to look at for certain when we're doing a block schedule analysis. Do we have one thing I've read in some of the articles I've read is that it's actually costing districts money.
It can.
To do this. Are we spending any money on our absenteeism? Does anyone own this, or do we have any special staff member?
No, we have, I know the counselors are studying it at the high school. In my previous life, we would work closely with the county, and there would be really a person at the county who we would work through. Here, I don't think we have that strong of a relationship with Washington County for absenteeism.
Okay. For me, it's always at the board level being concerned with more budgeting. This was an article talking it from what is a board member's concern? And it was cost of staff or cost of having to increase budgets in certain areas. And I wasn't aware that we have anyone that's a attendance officer or something that overseeing this in our district.
No.
Not overseeing it.
Principals, social workers, counselors, all carry that.
And I'd throw the nurses.
nurses,
They
too.
do,
Oh,
they do a
perfect.
lot of follow-up whenever a student
With
is,
abs. Mhm.
is absent. They follow up, especially if it's an illness, they follow up and try to see if they can support them and what they need and, you know, to get them healthy and back to school. So they're
Yeah.
instrumental there as well.
Kind of along with that, I'm wondering if, like, the teachers actually are absorbing that cost in making the makeup work and following
Yes.
up with the
Sure.
makeup work.
Yep.
And at different levels. I mean, at
Right.
high school, if there's school of GOK, it's one thing, but,
Sure.
you know, at the elementary level, no, it's a totally different.
Yep.
I
Catching
miss
them
2.5
up
days of math when they're gone a day.
There we go.
When they-
Yep, see?
Right,
Yeah.
and they talk about it, it does delay, you know, because they do, like a classroom teacher will have to come back to bring those kids back up to speed. So it does delay the overall pace of the curriculum at an elementary level when there's a lot of absenteeism, because they have to continually be going back to
Catch up, right?
reteach.
To reteach.
Right, and that slows it down even for the advanced learners. They're kind of
Yeah,
getting
slows it down.
down a little bit. So yeah, there's definitely impact.
Our teachers don't like pre-give work, do they? Do we have any procedure on that? Or do they just catch
I
students up?
think if you know, I think that's teacher dependent. If, in some families, if they know that they have this special trip that they're going on, they might be able to get
Ask
the
for in advance
materials.
work? Because that is something else I read about is, again, you're talking about that grit and grace, where's that line of what the district is gonna expect their staff to do to accommodate those requests? So I wasn't aware of what our procedures are related to that, but could be something to,
I think that's why those processes and procedures, laying that out a little bit more so that families are aware of what.
right? Because it takes a lot of time for teachers to
It
get
does.
work in advance and,
Right.
you know, and do that, so. Yeah, fascinating information, so thank you very much for this. Any other questions? Great,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
I'll leave you up here
I
for
think I'm staying-
policy.
Yeah, you're,
Okay.
How fast you can get through this, Paul?
Oh, man, just watch.
exactly. All
I mean, I
right,
can sit
so,
up here all night.
Right.
I know you guys got other things to do.
okay, so now we're moving on to our last item of the evening. And we are having a second reading on policies 407, 408, 409, 422, and 501. So let you go over those.
Yeah, so these were all presented as a first reading at the last board meeting. And so you've had an opportunity to look at them. I've not received any input regarding the policies after the first reading. There's been no changes for the second reading to any of the policies here. So we have 407, employee right to know, exposure to hazardous substances. And that's a new policy for us. It doesn't replace anything, so it brings us into alignment with legal requirements. Policy 408, subpoena of a school district employee. Again, that's a new policy for us that we would be adopting. Just lays out the processes for responding to a subpoena. 409, employee publications, instructional materials, inventions, and creations. This is also is a new policy for us. For the most part, it's a new policy. It does replace policy 409.1, which was revoked at the last meeting. So this is new language for us, and it addresses those issues and concerns as they may come up. Policy 422, policies incorporated by reference. This is a new policy for us as well. And this policy, as you recall, reinforces that some policies in one series also applies to another series. So a student policy would also apply to a staff in certain circumstances. And the final one is the school weapons policy, and this is an update to our policy. And in a particular update with this one, it really, the new language is really around the definition of dangerous weapon, and that was a new requirement to have that in policy. So this policy adds that. It is a mandatory policy, and by adopting it would bring us into full compliance with that mandatory requirement.
Great. As we have been doing this year, if there's anyone in the public who would like to come speak up about any of these policies, they're welcome to do so in accordance with our public comment rules.
Oh, he's moving.
Okay, and so with that, we are able to take action, seeing there's no public comment on these. So I will go ahead and make a motion to approve policy 407, 408, 409, 422, and 501. Can I get a second?
Second.
Great. Director Thielander with the second. All those in favor of approving those policies, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Policy passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, we're adjourned.